Good evening, I'm Wendy Mesley, and this is The National. A rough and tumble flight sends 10 people to hospital.
Babies screaming, people in front of us hitting the ceilings.
Climate experts say it'll happen more and more. Europe swelters under a deadly heat wave. Sidney Crosby turns 30 and inspires the new kids.
I've liked them since I was born.
Diana's blunt discussion of her doomed marriage. It airs in Britain for the first time.
I don't know how they allowed it.
Plus, conspiracy theories go mainstream.
You have to look at every possibility.
A routine transatlantic flight turned into a horror show over the weekend when extreme turbulence hit unexpectedly, sending drinks and laptops flying through the cabin. In fact, the drop was so extreme, some passengers thought the plane was in free fall. And as Stephanie Skandaris reports, scientists are warning this could become a more common occurrence.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Captain, we really apologize for that unexpected moment.
It was enough to cause belongings to fly and beverages to splatter the ceiling of American Airlines Flight 759 and to hurt 3 passengers and 7 flight attendants. The journey from Athens to Philadelphia had only 30 minutes left when severe turbulence struck.
There wasn't really any warning at all. I think that's kind of what caught so many people off guard, is there was just very slight turbulence for about 5 seconds, and then suddenly it felt like the whole plane was in free fall.
The seatbelt sign was on, but the pilot told passengers he didn't see it coming.
We're expecting some light turbulence. Aircraft in front of us didn't report anything. It just was totally unexpected.
It's just the latest example of passengers experiencing severe turbulence and a scary ride. In 2 extreme cases, 27 people were injured while traveling from Moscow to Bangkok in May. In late 2015, 21 people were hurt on an Air Canada flight from Shanghai. Those cases, and this recent one, were all caused by something called clear air. It happens when cold and warm air come together, and it's hard to predict. A study released in April says clear air turbulence is on the rise, particularly on transatlantic flights because of climate change.
The latest studies are showing around a 25% increase in how strong the turbulence will feel, but also perhaps a doubling of the prevalence or the frequency of strong turbulence. Clear air may also have an impact on passengers' wallets. It's there long enough that flight paths do get modified in order to avoid it if it's severe enough. And so if that increases in the future, then flights could take longer. That means more fuel spent. It wouldn't make flights cheaper, that's for sure. And climate change might affect more than turbulence.
As temperatures rise, the density of air declines, and so airplanes, in a less dense environment, an airplane has to go faster in order to take off.
Koffel says if an airplane has to go faster, it will need to lighten its load. It could do that by cutting the amount of fuel or people on board, but a more likely scenario will be more restrictions on baggage weight. Stephanie Skandaris, CBC News, Toronto.
Extreme turbulence aside, for most air travelers, things can get pretty rocky even before takeoff. Wait times at airport security are at an all-time high. That's in part due to federal budget cuts in recent years. The lines in Toronto have been so bad, CBC News has learned officials at Pearson Airport have been spending millions to bring in extra staff. And Vancouver's airport has started doing the same. It's all costing passengers around $26 extra on an international flight to offset the additional costs. A deadly heat wave spanning much of Europe has left millions of people worn out and desperate for relief. It's so bad it's been dubbed the Lucifer heat wave, as in it's hot as hell. But now, as Thomas Dagley reports, another twist.
In scorching hot Croatia, they've called in the water bombers before forest fires get out of hand. In neighboring Bosnia, it's too late. The mountains are burning over 20 kilometers despite best efforts to put out the flames. Some of the striking scenes from the hellish heat wave known as Lucifer. Across Central and Eastern Europe, temperatures have soared above 40 degrees. In Athens, even Greeks accustomed to a southern climate today found it hard to cope. I can hardly stand it, she says. It's unbearable. High up in the Austrian Alps, a resort normally open year-round had to restrict skiing hours because it's too warm even there. In Sicily, they're bracing for a wine shortage as grapes ripened at their earliest time in a decade, and the heat makes the harvest that much harder. The temperature was so high, we had to tell the workers to come back later when it's cooler, says this vineyard owner. We all suffer. Elsewhere in Sicily, there were different worries as 15 Italian firefighters were arrested, accused of starting fires to get more work. Today, though, it wasn't only heat causing headaches. The wild weather took a turn. Romania's strong winds knocked down trees, the storm leaving behind golf ball-sized hail. The grapes, my hut, the cornfield, everything is a mess now, he says. Tonight, southern parts of Europe remain under an orange alert, meaning conditions are considered dangerous. Scientists are warning southern Europe will continue to bear the brunt of climate change, with weather-related deaths only increasing. Further west here in Britain, conditions have been more temperate, but that might not last, with forecasters warning of heavy rain and thunder followed by flooding. This summer has seen extreme weather of all forms. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, London.
A massive cleanup is underway in New Orleans after more than 20 centimeters of rain fell over 3 hours on the weekend.
It's like the water just dropped down out of nowhere.
Some cars were partially submerged and had to be towed away. Today, the mayor toured damage and called the flooding catastrophic. The city will investigate whether the drainage system was working properly. More than 600 people forced to flee because of a fire threat are allowed to return home tonight. Officials in British Columbia have given the all clear to some areas near Williams Lake. But thick smoke continues to blanket the south coast, including Vancouver. The skies aren't expected to clear before the weekend. And 40 ranchers in Clinton, BC are demanding compensation from the province. They say controlled fires went terribly wrong, destroyed livestock and property. The BC Wildfire Service is investigating and says some of the ranchers may qualify for a payout. Coming up,
Hillary Clinton has personally murdered children.
As conspiracy theories gain ground, they undermine real news. So what's the story in Canada?
This is damaging to the monarchy.
Plus, nearly 20 years after her death, Diana's personal musings go public in Britain. North Korea delivered an ominous threat today, saying its nuclear ballistic missile program has the capability of reaching the United States and that the Americans will pay the price for the recent sanctions adopted by the UN Security Council. Carolyn Dunn has reaction to the rhetoric.
Increasingly isolated, North Korea used state television to lash out. There is no bigger mistake than the United States believing its land is safe across the ocean, she says. North Korea is threatening to use what it calls ultimate measures in response to new sanctions approved unanimously by the United Nations Security Council. At stake, nearly a third of its export revenues, approximately $1 billion. But the strength in the U.S. drafted resolution is that it was passed unanimously, including by China, North Korea's largest trading partner and often its enabler. So the U.S. Secretary of State found himself with the authority today to speak on behalf of all 15 members of the Security Council.
It's quite clear in terms of there being no daylight among the international community as to the expectation that North Korea will take steps to achieve all of our objectives, which is a denuclearized Korean peninsula.
North Korea pushed the limits of the international community's patience last month when it tested 2 intercontinental ballistic missiles. The provocative action put even more pressure on its neighbor, China, to join the chorus against North Korea's nuclear program. Some analysts question how effective that will be.
I think China has shown in the last, certainly 17 years, that it is not willing to do what it takes to get North Korea, if it even has that power, to stop its nuclear and missile programs.
The U.S. Secretary of State suggested talks are the end game.
The best signal that North Korea could give us that they're prepared to talk would be to stop these missile launches.
North Korea's spokesperson made it clear Pyongyang is not in a chatty mood at the moment. We'll never place our nuclear and ballistic missile program on the negotiating table, he says. In the end, it may be up to China to help move North Korea from that position, but it's still in question just how willing it is to do that. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
Supporters of Venezuela's embattled government took to the streets today. Thousands walked through the capital, chanting slogans in support of President Nicolas Maduro. They also called for an end to weeks of violence. The march comes a day after anti-government protesters stormed a military base.
Mr. Zuma, please leave. Baba, please leave. You don't belong here.
And things got heated today in South Africa's parliament. Opposition leaders are calling on President Jacob Zuma to step down over corruption allegations. Thousands of people took to the streets, also calling for his resignation. A no-confidence vote will be held tomorrow. U.S. President Donald Trump is now facing yet another legal battle. Today, Chicago filed a lawsuit demanding the Trump administration back off from its threats to scrap federal funding for so-called sanctuary cities. And as Paul Hunter reports, Chicago's stand is about more than politics.
There's no legal definition for what they call sanctuary cities, but it kind of works like this. Don't ask, don't tell. Local police generally won't ask anyone's immigration status, and cities generally won't alert federal authorities about it either. The idea is that it makes for a better community. People, including illegal immigrants, are more likely to trust the police and to help out when there's trouble. All kinds of U.S. cities operate this way, much to the apparent frustration of Donald Trump.
I've met police that are great police that aren't allowed to do their job because they have a pathetic mayor, or a mayor doesn't know what's going on.
That's Trump last month, who's long linked illegal immigration with violent crime, commenting ahead of steps by one of America's most powerful mayors, Chicago's Rahm Emanuel, to push back against the president's latest efforts to take the sanctuary out of sanctuary cities. A new directive from the Department of Justice says cities that fail to provide access to or information on illegal immigrants held by police will not qualify for federal grants that go toward policing. Says Emanuel, there's zero chance his city will ever agree to that.
Chicago will not let our police officers become political pawns in a debate. Chicago will not let our residents have their fundamental rights isolated and violated.
Emanuel, who, by the way, was once Barack Obama's chief of staff, is now pushing back in court, today suing the Trump administration over its pressure tactics.
We are bringing this legal challenge because the rhetoric and the threats from this administration embodied in these new conditions imposed on unrelated public safety grant funds are breeding a culture and a climate of fear within the communities in our city.
Says the Department of Justice, sanctuary cities threaten public safety. Says the city of Chicago, that notion is, put simply, divorced from reality. And thus is born the latest legal challenge targeting the Trump presidency. Goes the thinking, there will be more. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
One of Canada's hockey heroes is celebrating a milestone birthday. Sidney Crosby turned 30 today. His hometown came out for a big party and to catch a glimpse of the Stanley Cup. Carolyn Ray has that.
Oh my God!
Say happy birthday!
Happy birthday, Sid! Happy birthday!
For Kaylee Spray, this is the moment. She came from St. John, New Brunswick to see Sidney Crosby.
Oh my God! He's right there!
It was like that all morning. Die-hard Pittsburgh Penguins fans who made plans to come to Halifax as soon as Crosby's team won the Stanley Cup for the second year in a row.
all the way from Ontario.
See this?
Yeah, absolutely. See Crosby.
This is Crosby's third visit to his home province of Nova Scotia with the Cup. He first won it in 2009, but this celebration doesn't get old. All morning, people waited, making sure they didn't miss a moment. For some families, this has the makings of a tradition. They haven't missed a Stanley Cup party, making signs to occupy their time, some even bringing appropriate activities. Celebrating his 30th birthday today, Sid is no longer the kid. At a news conference earlier in the day, he said he still savors these moments.
Anytime you can bring it home, it's special, but, back to back, it's so difficult to do, and to be able to share that with everyone is unique. So I just try to enjoy it as much as I can.
Crosby has gone out of his way to make this a community event, surprising children at the local hospital, dropping in on veterans. He took the cup to a farmer's market and saluted boaters on his lake. Around here, he's inspired a generation of hockey fans.
I wore number 87 last year, and I was the captain of my team.
I've liked them since I was born. They're the first team I saw play in hockey.
Even this 4-month-old baby can claim a Crosby connection. Daisy May was born on the first day of this year's playoff run.
I'm a huge Crosby fan, and my boyfriend's a really big Malkin fan, so naturally she's going to be a Penguins fan.
As the party wrapped up, there was already talk of next year. The Stanley Cup was the highlight of the parade, and they'll gladly welcome it again. Carolyn Ray, CBC News, Halifax.
Straight ahead, nearly 20 years since the death of Princess Diana, she's still a threat to the royal family's image.
We're able not only to hear the best performers, the greatest music, but we can keep in touch with the ever-changing musical trends around the world.
For instance, everybody's using the term high five, but many of us, including me, don't know what this really means.
We've had a great many letters requesting information about high five. So, as U60's policy is to program what you want, here with us today to answer your questions and ours about high five is Mr. George H. Jones, CBC's Divisional Engineer. Welcome to U60, Mr. Jones. It seems these days we hear a great deal about high five, but actually, what is it?
Well, high five usually is applied to a piece of furniture played by a record.
So therefore, a high five says there's nothing more than a record player.
That's right.
Well, it's certainly come a long way from the beginning. What was the start?
Well, we have an early one here, Penny. This one was built somewhere in the early 1900s.
What about this? What does it do?
Well, at the beginning, the sound is recorded on the disc in a great many small grooves. A needle here rides in the grooves as the record turns around, and this needle makes a diaphragm vibrate. This diaphragm creates a sound which comes down here through the plate and is amplified as it goes through this horn and is heard at the other end.
Well, this isn't the high five that we know today, is it? Or is it?
No, here is one, a modern one today. This one resembles the old one in certain respects. It still has a pickup meter, which in this case converts the sound in the grooves to electrical currents, which are passed through wiring here over to this amplifier. The amplifier makes them louder and feeds them to the speaker in the box over there, which converts them back into sound again.
So these three pieces here compose the high five set as we know today.
That's right.
And would this piece of equipment be the trumpet speaker that we saw in the old machine?
Yes, it would. This is the unit that the sound comes from.
I was brought up in the sense that, when you got engaged with someone, you love them.
We're We're getting another glimpse into the private life of a once very public figure. A new documentary about Princess Diana has aired in the UK. It features Diana speaking frankly about her marriage and sex life with Prince Charles. The film is dividing audiences. As Renee Filipponi tells us, some say it's insightful, others call it intrusive.
Sort of once every 3 weeks. And then it fizzled out about 7 years ago. 6 years ago.
In her living room, the Princess of Wales opens up in private to her voice coach.
Slightly faster.
About intimate details of life with Charles and her struggle inside the palace walls.
I chose to hurt myself instead of hurting all of you.
Channel 4 made the decision to air the videos now, to mark 20 years since her death.
Everybody knew about the bulimia in the family, and they all blamed the failure of the marriage on the bulimia.
Parts of this video aired in the U.S. in 2004. This is the first time it has been broadcast in the UK and has never before seen clips. Friends and family of the princess had tried to stop the documentary for fear of the impact on Diana's legacy and her sons, Princes William and Harry. This mother-daughter pair are visiting Kensington Palace today. Fans of the monarchy, they tuned in for the doc last night.
I don't know how it was allowed, to be honest. You know, I don't know how they allowed it.
I think the opposite. I think it was a fantastic documentary, and I feel that the truth has come out. And I believed every word in that documentary.
Diana has spoken candidly about her life.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
She wasn't shy to air her grievances with the royal family. People involved in the documentary say she would have wanted these tapes public. Not everyone agrees.
People do have a fascination, but I'm not sure that it's the sort of fascination we should be feeding.
This royal biographer says releasing this video will only hurt the royals at an important time of transition by giving people who are not fans of the monarchy more reason to turn their back on them.
This is damaging to the monarchy, and they want it all out there, and they think that it's the right of us to know what went on. It's not our right to know what went on.
You've got a voice that people want to hear.
It's just one of many acknowledgements of Diana's lasting memory this year, each with its own take on her legacy, marking the life and death of a woman fondly known as the People's Princess. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
It's been 16 years since the September 11th attacks. Today, New York City's medical examiner officially identified one of the victims. New forensic technology was used to match a man's DNA to bone fragments. It's the first new identification of a victim since 2015. About 40% of the 2,700 people who died in the World Trade Center attacks were never formally identified. The 9/11 attacks led to all sorts of wild conspiracy theories. That trend has only gotten worse.
When you say parents faked their children's death, people get very angry.
Our panel explores the secret appeal of stuff you can hardly believe. Plus, the couple behind the Broadway hit Come From Away. Let's check the day's business numbers. Canadian markets were closed for the civic holiday. In New York, the Dow gained 25 points. The price of oil dropped 30 cents a barrel.
This is sodium silicofluoride, photographed in Brentford, where fluoridation has been used since 1945. It is said to be able to reduce tooth decay by 60%. At this moment, almost 32 million people in North America are drinking fluoridated water.
Now, Dr. Dunn, is it true or false that sodium fluoride is a basic ingredient in rat poison?
I think it's fair to say that sodium fluoride is contained in a rat poison, and I think it's also fair to say that it's contained in tea.
There are no deleterious effects to the human being drinking fluoridated water.
Anne Burton, president of Ontario's Citizens' Rights Association, has been campaigning against water fluoridation for over 20 years.
I'm just amazed that the general public can believe that you can treat the human body through the water supply, using the water supply as the vehicle to carry that treatment for a disease like tooth decay, which is neither waterborne nor contagious.
Water fluoridation is an issue that's been debated repeatedly. Some people think it's time to take another look at it.
What I'm concerned about is that if we're using fluoride from so many different sources, now we may be overexposing the body to the amounts of fluoride and eventually ending up probably with mottled teeth.
Very nice bite. Those patches are called fluorosis, a condition that shocks many parents because of the cause. Too much fluoride when Braden was a preschooler.
We don't really know just how much fluoride it takes to cause a little fluorosis. And it's something we didn't really know too much about 10 years ago.
Another cavity?
It's well known that fluoride helps prevent tooth decay. But there's a growing awareness that Canadian children may be getting too much fluoride from too many sources.
Well, it's like anything. You can have too much of a good thing.
Fluoridated water still remains the most equitable, most economic way of providing a preventive agent for dental caries to the general population.
Practically all major health organizations in North America have endorsed fluoridation as an effective and safe way to reduce dental decay.
General Motors Hockey Broadcast.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans in the United States.
At the time, I was doing work as a reporter. Basil Lake, the radio editor of the Star, came up to me and said, "You have another job tonight. You're going to broadcast the hockey game." Apparently, they had canvassed the entire sports department to get somebody to do it, and for some reason or other, no one was available.
Hockey night in Canada. Tonight, Toronto Maple Leafs and New York Rangers. Play-by-play by Foster Hewitt.
Out at center, 1-0 for the Toronto Maple Leafs over the New York Rangers as Nesterenko fires a shot from well out.
I think hockey is the greatest game there is. It's basically excitement. There's bodily contact, there's danger, not to the viewer, but to the participant. But it has about everything that helps to create a thrill in the minds of the spectator.
Let Ward take it. Ward is close. Here's Wetter right, and he shoots, he scores!
Broadcasting has been my life. It's given me the opportunity to travel all over our country and to meet some very wonderful people. I get a kick out of going west every year, visiting small localities. You meet all types, and they speak to you as if they've known you all their lives. This is a real big thrill, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans in the United States. We're at the 8-minute mark. There's no score. There's a shot. Goal! And right in on the net as a drive from the left side by Nesterenko slid in off Sawchuk's skate.
In this picture with the sun behind the lunar module, the front of the craft is clearly visible. The words United States are crisp and clear. How could these backlit pictures be so detailed?
It's because there's more than one light source, which means they're not on the moon.
What's going on? Conspiracy theories. They rarely hit the mainstream. From the fake moon landing to Elvis Presley, he's still alive. They're usually pretty wacky. But things changed last week when the White House allegedly became involved in a bizarre murder conspiracy.
Questions continue to swirl around the mysterious murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich.
Police say Seth Rich was killed in a botched robbery attempt, but Fox News was, until recently, pushing a very different theory, that Rich was the real leaker of the DNC emails, not Russian hackers, and that Hillary Clinton orchestrated his murder.
You have to look at every possibility.
Then this week, NPR reported that Trump's White House gave Fox News its blessing to go with the story. Conspiracy theories used to remain on the fringe. The assassination of JFK.
They had to have something that would throw the authorities off there in Dallas. Oswald became convenient.
To 9/11 truthers.
It could not have been anything other than controlled demolition. 9/11 was a false flag operation.
But then the White House responded to one of them.
Yes, in fact, I was born in Hawaii, August 4th, 1961.
The birther movement, the theory that President Obama was born in Kenya, was pushed by Trump.
There was supposed to be a birth certificate. I don't think it exists, Anderson.
Now he's president, and there's no end to the conspiracy theories.
People that are registered who are dead, who are illegals, who are in 2 states.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
Hillary Clinton has personally murdered children.
And now major conspiracy theorists are getting airtime in the mainstream media.
When you say parents faked their children's death, people get very angry.
Joining us now to talk about all of this, Elamin Abdelmahmoud, social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. Jonathan Kay is an author and freelance columnist. And Robin Urbach is opinion editor at CBC News. So, John, you've actually written a book about this. You've written a lot about conspiracy theories. They've always been around, but now you've got them sort of in the mainstream media. You've got them sort of in the White House. What's going on?
Well, conspiracy theories tend to be theories of evil and of illegitimate power. And the whole basis of the Trump presidency is the idea that there are illegitimate elites who are running the world. And so it's not surprising that Trump himself, who was at the center of the so-called birther movement 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that he would still have a fondness for this sort of thing, and he would surround himself with people who enable these kind of conspiracy theories. It's true that I wrote a book about it back in 2011, and I mentioned Trump, but never in my wildest dreams would I imagine that he would actually become the president. In that book, I described conspiracy theorists as on the margins, and I worried about them becoming more prominent. But nowhere in that book, unfortunately, did I predict that one of them would actually occupy the White House.
What's your sense, Robin? Like, why is this happening? Are they getting crazier? What's going on?
Well, I mean, as John has sort of said, conspiracy theories have been around forever. As long as humans have been able to think, people have been able to think outside the box, which is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about conspiracy theories. It's someone who rejects the mainstream narrative in a way. What's different now is a generation ago, or even a few decades ago, if you had a conspiracy theory about Hillary Clinton being a secret lizard person, which I think actually is...
David Icke.
Yes.
Yep.
So you would be resigned to sort of scribbling on the wall of your mom's basement, writing out your theories and going about your happy way. Now you can post that on Facebook. It's shared 20, 30, 40 times, even more than that, and suddenly you're getting emails from someone in Zurich telling you that he spent his life, you know, investigating the relationships between reptiles and humans and whatever. So it's really, you know, the idea that these theories are on the fringes is kind of going out because we're getting that gratification immediately. So you can put out some wild theory, you can get people to sort of back your idea, and because of that, they're sort of seen to have this kind of false legitimacy in a way.
We're laughing, but it's really not that funny.
No, it isn't. And you know, I think for me particularly, what's interesting about it is that Trump has a very elegant way of putting a conspiracy theory out there. And I say this hesitant to use the word elegant, but he will just say this thing where he's like, I've heard this, you know, and he will just put that thought out into the world. So, for example, when Justice Antonin Scalia died, he said, you know, I've heard the rumor about how there was a pillow on his face. And then all of a sudden, you hear all these conservative blogs saying, you know, this conservative justice of the Supreme Court might have been murdered. Why isn't the liberal...
But what's in it for him? Why is he embracing these?
A lot of power, right? Because he gets to appeal to... I mean, he's holding on to his base because he gets to say, I'm looking at stories that that other people are not looking at. So he gains credibility. He continues to be the authority figure for those people because mainstream media won't cover those stories because they're insane. But then Trump comes along and says, you know what, I hear what you're saying, and I think the mainstream media is hiding something from you, so maybe they should be looking into it. And he just appeals to them and their, you know, their logic.
So why doesn't the mainstream media cover these things, John?
Because it ends up being... Look, if you're at the New York Times, you're at the Washington Post, you know, you spend 10 minutes looking at some of these stories and you might feel, oh, this is an insult to our readers' intelligence. I'm not even going to bother covering it. Like in the case of, for instance, the Seth Rich story where you have people alleging that a tragic, fatal murder that took place in Washington, D.C. was somehow connected to WikiLeaks and Russia and this massive cover-up. The Washington police themselves say that's not the case. And so
why does Fox then? I mean, that is mainstream media.
Well, that's mainstream media. Fox has to do it because they're competing against the internet. Fox is a very interesting example because Fox is a bridge. Fox is a quasi-respectable network. So if you go to Alex Jones' InfoWars, that's a conspiracy theory website. Everybody knows that. And everybody knows that, say, the New York Times or NPR or Washington Post is respectable. Fox is in a very interesting place because Fox has one foot in one world and one foot in the other. And as such, Fox can legitimize stories, and then maybe a week later they can retract and say, oh, sorry, we were wrong about that, we're not going to cover it again. But the damage has already been done. There's no equivalent media on the left in the United States that acts as a quasi-legitimate enabler that's a bridge between the
Well, you're on
crazy
social media. You
conspiracists.
must get caught in this. Do you get people saying, why aren't you covering this story?
All the time, right? Because, I mean, like, every time that, you know, I work for BuzzFeed News, and every time we put out a tweet about a specific story, we get a bunch of people who are on the fringes saying, this is not the real story. Maybe you should be looking into Seth Rich, or maybe you should be looking into this other story that no one's heard of. But Fox listens to those people, and they find an audience with those people.
And they have to compete, because if Fox, you know, I'm sure there are people at Fox News who know that these are crazy stories, but they also know that if they don't at least give it some oxygen, if Tucker Carlson doesn't go on and talk about it, then people are going to ignore Fox News, and they're just going to spend all their time on Reddit or other sites that do. So it ends up being a game of survival for right-wing media.
But why is it so attractive? Like, why do people like this stuff?
I think there are a variety of reasons when we talk about why people buy into them. I think part of it is just sort of like a club aspect. It feels good to be part of a community of people who have like-minded ideas and can sort of reaffirm those theories that you have within yourself. I think there's also a bit of a high that you get from them too. When we're talking about some of these mainstream conspiracy theories, generally they involve issues that get your blood boiling. So they're about politics, religion, medicine, etc. And when we talk about them, we get sort of like a rush of adrenaline. And this is a cause that we feel like we need to fight for. So when we're talking about Seth Rich, it's, well, this just proves that the whole Russian conspiracy in the U.S. election was fraudulent, and I'm going to go out and fight for the truth. So I think it sort of reinforces this idea that we are doing good. We know the truth. We are part of this movement of a select group of enlightened people who know what's actually going on versus the lemmings who just sort of listen to the mainstream news and don't think critically about it.
Most of the big headlines have been American. What are there any Canadian conspiracy theories?
Of course there are. And you know, I'm not going to name just one website. Well, I will name just one specific website, and I think that's Ezra Levant and the Rebel, who every once in a while will traverse in conspiracy, and he will like to appeal to a certain audience in Canada who's interested in that kind of thing. A good example of that was as soon as the Quebec shooting happened earlier this year.
At the mosque.
That's right, at the mosque. He created a website called QuebecTerror.com, which he bought like almost like, you know, a few minutes after that happened.
.ca, if I remember correctly.
That's right, that's right.
Not to be confused with the more respectable QuebecTerror.com.
Yeah, that's right. But you know, and then his correspondents spent quite a bit of time trying to link, you know, reports that are completely bogus about another Muslim shooter who actually did the act.
Which police said did not exist.
That's right. Police said
this actually goes to an interesting trend in Canadian conspiracism, is that 20 years ago, leading Canadian conspiracy theories, or the most popular Canadian conspiracies, tended to come from the left. They tended to be about the United States and about the idea that the United States was going to swallow up Canada. It was a very popular conspiracy genre. Now, the leading source of conspiracism in Canada, and probably in the United States, often involves Muslims. And the idea that this or that Canadian politician, such as Justin Trudeau or Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, are secret agents of Islam. And in that way, there's a kind of a perverse similarity between the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that existed, well, for centuries. If you just substitute Jew for Muslim, a lot of the conspiracy theories are exactly the same.
But a lot of these theories are nonpartisan too. Like if we look at things that involve medicine, for example, autism, the connection between the MMR vaccine and autism, you know, that any left or right.
The non-existent.
The non-existent.
We hasten.
Important to clarify that.
Yes.
You know, in Canada, we had a conspiracy theory about Castro being Justin Trudeau's father.
Right. Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Which is hot, but totally untrue.
So you say. I'll send you a link later. You'll see. So I agree with John to a certain extent. I mean, we've seen sort of this sort of movement from left to right and vice versa, but I think there are, the idea of conspiracy theories itself isn't sort of the domain of the left or the right.
It's an explanation for evil. People crave an explanation for evil, and whether it's medical evil, whether it's 9/11, whether it's what they regard as an unholy political result, like the election of Barack Obama or someone else they don't like, people crave an explanation for it. And when someone like Trump provides it, even if the facts seem implausible, to them there's a grain of moral truth to it, and they want to believe it's true.
I don't know if it's just evil, because to me, like, you know, part of there's this whole conspiracy theory that Bill M103 is like this Trojan horse that Muslims are trying to get through so that Sharia law can begin to take over the country. And to me, that comes from observing from the world around you and saying, there are more Muslims around in the country than there were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What is happening? Maybe they have some sort of political clout. So it's just like trying to explain change. Like, it's people who are just afraid.
I got to cut you off, Rama. We're out of time. I was going to ask, can this actually be stopped? But seeing as it's been around for eons, probably not.
People watching sensible folks like us, that's the antidote.
We'll fix everything. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great summer. Up next, a conspiracy of kindness. I'll speak with the creators of Come From Away about the Newfoundland town that inspired their Broadway hit and the world-famous guests who add to the drama.
The television show that challenges all comers is still doing just that, 30 years on. Front Page Challenge is entering its 30th year of broadcasting in Canada. And last night, at a glittering reception in Ottawa, they remembered and they celebrated those memorable years. Dan Bjarnason has prepared this report.
Few Canadian institutions have lasted as long as Front Page Challenge. And to become more popular year after year is something to be envied.
That's the opinion of one viewer at least, expressed over a decade ago. And now, after 30 years on the air, the show's more of an institution than ever.
Tonight on Front Page Challenge.
Hammered out in 1957 in a producer's living room as a summer fill-in, and in a business where programs fight for breath and often die after a few weeks, Front Page Challenge is one of the most successful TV shows in history. The program developed the look of a miniature history of the 20th century. There was the silly...
let's not talk about diamonds. That's a dull subject.
Let's not talk about diamonds.
Let me talk to you about your ex-husband, George Sanders. Are you still friends with him? Every time you speak about him...
Let's talk about diamonds.
There was the profound...
my whole Christian background had a great deal to do with my coming to this conclusion that love and nonviolence should be the regulating ideals in any struggle for human dignity.
Perhaps the show's chief drawing card was, until his death, an endearing scamp, Gordon Sinclair.
Did the personal event happening to you cause you to feel happy or joy or euphoric? Oop.
No euphoric. There wasn't an ounce of euphoric in it.
On occasion, the panel goofed on the obvious.
Well, let's see what's left. Mumbly peg, I guess that they don't do that anymore. This is a sport where you run around.
Is it boxing by any chance?
No.
No. Swimming.
Not once in 4 appearances did they manage to guess
Gordie Howe.
Hooray! One of the original moderators 30 years ago, Alec Barris, today is the program's writer. He recalls some early disasters, such as Winston Churchill's son, Randolph.
Who was sort of 9 sheets in the wind by the time he got to the studio. Went to the wrong studio first, and when he finally got to the right studio, he insisted that somebody go out and get him a bottle of whiskey, which he killed before the show, and he didn't even need it.
Then there was the defecting Russian diplomat, Igor Gazanko.
And then when he came in, he insisted that he had to have his voice muffled so it wouldn't be recognizable. B, he had to wear the hood over his face so he wouldn't be recognized. But the funny part came in when he saw that Fred Davis was in the makeup room getting makeup on. He insisted he had to have makeup on too, even though he was going to wear the hood.
It's hard to imagine now, but the critics panned the show opening night 30 years ago. A corpse, they called it. A long 30 minutes. The critics were wrong. Last night, the taping of a 1-hour birthday spectacular. Critics had also predicted that Front Page Challenge wouldn't last after Gordon Sinclair. The critics were wrong again. Dan Bjarnason, CBC News, Ottawa.
You look like you Dutch.
I am Dutch. How'd you know that?
I can tell.
You Japanese, bud?
No.
You look Japanese.
No?
Yeah, you look like that guy in The Last Samurai.
Tom Cruise?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
During a time of tragedy and need, the people of Gander, Newfoundland opened their hearts and homes. That generous spirit was immortalized in the hit musical Come From Away. I talked to the creators of the Broadway sensation earlier this summer, just before it won for Best Direction of a Musical at this year's Tony Awards. That conversation in just a moment. But first, some background. It's hard to get more Canadian than this. A kiss and a card and whatever's in between. A scene from the Tim Hortons in Gander, Newfoundland, town of 9,000, as the residents take in almost 7,000 stranded passengers from 38 planes that were diverted because of 9/11.
Tonight we honor what was lost, but we also commemorate what we found.
It's the musical brainchild of Irene Sankoff and David Hine. The couple visited Gander on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. After connecting with the community, they knew this was a story that needed to be told.
Heave away, me Johnny's heave away.
Irene and David mounted productions in San Diego, Seattle, and D.C. before a sold-out run in Toronto.
Our story starts. It's my first day at the station.
Gander got a show too.
I'm sure that everybody that sees this will have a good feeling in the bottom of their gut. My gut is sore from laughing and crying.
Then, the big time, Broadway. One of just 5 Canadian musicals to ever make it there.
Heave away, me Johnny boys, we're all bound away.
The nominees for Best Musical are Come From Away.
Soon after, the Tony nominations started pouring in. And now, Come From Away is gearing up for a major North American tour, maybe even the West End in London. I met up with David and Irene earlier, after the show, in New York's theater district. For so long, people in the arts and television and movies and so on were really careful. There was almost a taboo about telling 9/11 stories. But through Gander, through this story, it's like why is it different?
Well, we didn't set out to tell a 9/11 story. I mean, we fell in love with Newfoundland. We wanted to tell the story not about what happened here in New York, but about how they responded, about how these people responded to a tragedy, and how we can all respond to a tragedy through kindness. So we call it a 9/12 story. This is how they responded, but also the show can be in response to any tragedy to some degree if people were grounded somewhere, and that's what I hope the show does, is that we don't have to wait for a tragedy to bring out this kindness.
And there comes a time when I think through art you can sort of look back and examine and feel both sides, you know, both the pain and the suffering, and you know, and the joy that, you know, the human spirit just tries to, you know, like as a species, that's what we do, or we won't survive.
Well, it is quite the story in this age where you've got walls going up and you've got the president talking about, you know, banning immigrants, and then you've got Newfoundland welcoming them. So it's a particular message in a particular time.
We had this amazing experience out in Washington, D.C. of having this bipartisan audience from both sides of the aisle coming together to celebrate this story about human kindness and about coming together. And it feels like time and again we've seen that, you know, people want to, you know, bridge these differences regardless of race or religion or where you're from. People are looking for that, and you know, regardless of politics, it feels like the story is good to tell right now. It's been good for us.
So our Prime Minister and Donald Trump's daughter went to see your show. What was that like? Did you get a phone call saying they want to, like, how did that go down?
We did get a phone call telling us that it was going to happen, and there's a whole preparation of the theater, and he was so lovely afterwards. He thanked the stage management crew and the crew for
letting them invade, really, you know, for disrupting, you know, what the usual rhythm is.
Yeah. And we found out right before the show, we said, so they're coming, and they said, yes, and your job is to introduce him to the entire band, the entire crew, all of the Newfoundlanders, all of the Come From Aways who were here that night, and we were like, oh, we're going to hang out with them on stage. Okay. And it was amazing. I mean, what was amazing about it was that night and opening night, we had the people who had inspired the characters, and we brought them out on stage. And to see the Prime Minister of Canada speak to each one of them and talk to them about their experience. I mean, all of the Newfoundlanders will say, you know, it's what they did was just ordinary. It's just what anyone would have done. But to have it recognized by the head of your country, and to have it recognized by this New York audience giving them a standing ovation and cheering for them, it's really wonderful to see them, you know, realize that it's extraordinary. It's really amazing what they did.
Being there for each other in times of difficulty is something that Newfoundlanders get, and it's certainly something that Canadians and Americans get.
Ivanka was there too.
Yes, yeah.
Did you want her to pass on messages to Dad, or?
We hoped that she would be moved by the story, and you know, I tried to very professionally sit throughout the entire show and not look behind me, and then at the very end, I just couldn't help myself, and I turned around and I looked at her, and I saw her just as she was clapping, and she turned to Nikki Haley and she said, you know, that was really, really great.
I guess it makes me think of when the Vice President arrived for the showing of Hamilton and got booed.
We truly hope that this show has inspired you to uphold our American values and to work on behalf of all of us.
Like, have you had to tell your cast what to do if you were to show up? Like, what would you do?
We never wanted to tell anyone what to do, but I think there's been a general understanding that, you know, because we've talked about it. We've talked about what would we want to say, and I think what we want to say is look at what happened in Newfoundland. Look at this time when around the world we were all refugees being brought off planes.
City, Gander, oh.
And you know, we talk so much about how the Newfoundlanders were kind and they were generous, but we don't talk enough about how they were smart and they were courageous. This was after 9/11. People were really scared. These were strangers on the planes.
They had no idea what to expect off those planes. They really didn't.
And they had every right to keep them on the planes or to keep them at the airport and to say these people
look, they didn't have to land them at all. You know what I mean?
Do you have the number for the Ganja Hotel?
I mean, it never crossed their mind, I don't think. But, you know, they said, you know, this is going to be hard to do. Like, I think one of the guys at the air traffic control tower said, you know, if he said to me half an hour before it happened, can you land this many planes in this amount of time, he would have said no.
Yeah.
You know, and yet they did it.
But instead of 7,000 scared and angry people with no information being bottled up, they brought them into their homes, they gave them everything, and instead of 7,000 enemies, they made 7,000 friends. And I think there's something really valuable about remembering that and seeing that as a valuable strategy to reaching out across our divides and saying, I don't know you, but I'm going to welcome you into my home.
There were people in the crowd who were going, wow, I never knew that story, or I probably never thought of Newfoundland. And it's a pretty wonderful story. It's a pretty wonderful place for people to know about. Do you think, like, are people going to go there? We see the ads in Canada.
Yeah.
They're talking about it. They're talking about, they're doing a lot of tourism planning right now. And
really?
we were tourists
on the basis of your show?
On the basis of the show. They're having come-from-away tours out there. And there's a special package where you get to have dinner with the mayor of Gander. And I'd take that package. He's amazing. And we were tourists at the time when we went out there on the 10th anniversary. We were come from a ways. It was so good for us to be there, and I can't wait to go back.
Well, what was it like to put it on in Gander?
You know, people in the cast say there are words in the English language that have been invented yet. It was such an unbelievable experience. I mean, and apparently the cast is backstage, and they are all just being like, we're not going to cry. No one's going to cry. No one's going to lose it.
We're just going to do the show. And they got out there, and they started singing I'm an Islander. And the crowd started screaming and cheering, and they stood up, and all of them went, oh, we all started like we were messes. And then in the middle of it, we've got this traditional song, Heave Away.
He's waving from the dock, heave away, me Johnny's heave away.
Where everyone else thinks this is a nice Newfoundland song that we clearly wrote. But in Newfoundland, you know, the cast thinks da 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 da, and 5,000 people went, heave away, and we all went, it was incredible. And then 10 minutes before the show ended, they all stood up. They stood up and gave us a standing ovation while the show was finishing. I mean, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience already, just getting to say to your cast, this is where it was inspired, this is where we were inspired, these are the people who inspired us, you know, this is this is Oz Fudge who drives his police cruiser, and you get to drive it, and this is Bonnie Harris who runs the SPCA, and you get to cuddle the same kittens. Like that's incredible enough. But then to share this thing that we created based on their stories, to reflect their culture and say, this is amazing, we want to celebrate you, and I think Newfoundlanders aren't used to being celebrated, and it was really good.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was fun to talk to you guys.
Me too.
Media ethics are big news these days. Straight ahead, we'll show you a BBC anchor who refused to fake interest in his own story.
This is the National News Bulletin, a summary of the day's news.
Even bad news sounded good in those exciting, terrible days when radio news came of age, especially when read by our own voice of doom, Lorne Greene, when Haas was a colt.
Naval battle in the South Pacific.
Madam, will you please put away that knitting? You're going to have to applaud, you know. Now, let's all relax. Everybody, shall we? Nobody be nervous.
And to balance the glum news from overseas, CBC Radio offered happy-go-lucky fare.
Who's there? It's the Happy Gang. Well, come on in.
It all began in 1901. The discoverer of wireless, Marconi, received his first transatlantic radio message from Signal Hill in Newfoundland.
Hi! And CBC Radio has been seeing to it that Canada gets the message ever since. In an array of programs from music talk shows like this, ranging through schools and youth, agriculture, religion, serious music, and variety.
A busy place, the CBC, and a big country to serve. How do you suppose all these programs get to all the people spread all over the map?
Well, if you think of the network as a superhighway, then you can picture national program clearance as the traffic cop who keeps things flowing smoothly. National program clearance arranges distribution of our radio and TV programs by landlines and by coast-to-coast microwave network. Just to complicate matters, there are several problems arising out of the different time zones into which the country is divided, not to mention line availability.
Ah, yes, line availability.
I said not to mention that.
Oh, sorry.
A CBC color presentation.
Let's follow an average broadcasting day from the beginning. It's very simple. There's the business of booking studios, getting the slides to Telecine, last-minute news inserts, coffee to be ordered, public affairs specials, graphics to be ordered and approved, clear screen projection to be set up, stagehands to be scheduled, coffee to be brought, beats to be lined up, pianos to tune, light bulbs to be replaced, monitors to be serviced, press releases to be issued, coffee to be tasted, props to be picked up, cameras to be fired, shot lists to be typed, rehearsals to be scheduled, contracts to be drawn up, cold coffee to be dumped, memos to be filed.
Hold it, cut.
Cut. The only way this will cut is go back to the beginning.
Okay, want to dance with me? No, well...
Hey guys, Johnny Harris here. Still standing. Season 3 is up and off to a roaring start, but we still have a lot of great stories from little towns across the country. So tune in, will you? Tuesday nights, 8 o'clock on CBC.
With all the talk of fake news and empty content, it's crucial that we in the media defend our core principles of honesty and integrity and focus squarely on the stories that matter. So, with that in mind, we'd like to show you how BBC News presenter Simon McCoy handled a really big story.
Just bear in mind it is August. This does not look like a walk in the park. Dog owners and their pets in California have hit the waves in the second annual World Dog Surfing Championships. Here are the pictures. The competitors' main challenge is to stay afloat on the board. This is in Pacifica near San Francisco, but there are also prizes for the best dressed and tandem surfing dogs. The winner, of course, being crowned top dog. That's a shame. We've run out of pictures.
Oh, and for the headline, an Australian Kelpie named Abbey Girl won for the second year in a row. Well, he'd never make it as on Hockey Night in Canada. It is August, that's our excuse too, and that's the National for this Monday night. For real news at any hour, you can always go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Wendy Mesley.